Good afternoon, everybody. As mentioned, I'm Sarah Vogel. I'm the horticulture educator serving DeWitt, Macon, and Piatt counties, and I am based in Decatur. And we are going to talk a little bit about the root awakening and some tips to take care of our trees in the spring. So as winter begins to fade, hopefully soon for us, and the first signs of spring emerge, it's time to give our trees the care that they need to thrive, not just survive, right? We want them to thrive because trees, like all living things, require attention and maintenance, and especially as they transition from dormancy into the growing season. We want to help our trees recover from any winter damage, help boost their health and really in efforts to promote strong roots and lush leaves throughout the spring and the entire growing season. So, how do trees even go into dormancy? We just want to touch on that. Dormancy in trees refers to a period when that tree is alive but not actively growing, right? So during this phase, the tree's internal processes slow down and pause until conditions become favorable for growth again. Unlike evergreen trees, which retain their foliage due to their, specific adaptations, deciduous trees enter dormancy to conserve water and nutrients and to protect themselves from damage that would be caused by cold temperatures. Several factors uh, cause trees to enter dormancy, with light being a major factor. The photo period, or the amount of daylight, is going to change with the season. We're all used to that. Um, Trees sense these changes through photoreceptors called phytochromes. And as the days get shorter, trees spend less time in an active state, leading to the production of the plant hormone abscisic acid, and that starts dormancy. So, and just a little side note on plant hormones, they regulate many, many aspects of plant growth, including cell division, stress responses, fruit ripening. There are five major plant hormones. That's abscisic acid, auxins, ethylene, cytokinins, and gibberellins. But there are also other hormones responsible for other types of plant growth and process. So abscisic acid, or also called ABA, is a hormone made in the roots of the trees that help them survive tough conditions. When a tree is stressed, like during dormancy, ABA is produced in response to the amount of light. And this signals that the best time for making sugars is coming to an end. So as our seasons change, it's ABA that slows down the tree's activities and decreases auxin levels. Auxin is another plant hormone. You can see this in action when the leaves are changing. That is the tree pulling back those nutrients from the leaves that were used for photosynthesis in the summer. I'm sorry, not pulling back nutrients, pulling back, I guess, little parts of the cells that would nutrients would support that were used for photosynthesis in the summer. And that reabsorption process, along with the shedding of leaves, is controlled by the change in levels of two other hormones. I mentioned auxin and ethylene. As water and nutrients move back into the tree's center, the buds dry out and start to form this tough outer layer to protect the living tissue that's inside. And this helps the tree, kind of wait for longer days to start growing again. And then finally, the leaves fall off and the tree enters true dormancy. Um, the they will stay dormant until the days start to get longer again, of course. And when this happens, those photoreceptors, or phytochromes, that are under the bark in the tree's stem and twigs become active for longer periods. So that reduces the production of that abscisic acid, or ABA, which in turn lowers growth inhibition. The production of auxin, which that plant hormone is sort of the driving hormone for the growth of a plant through warm months. and auxin's processes start up again, encouraging roots to dig deeper and the branches to stretch out. So as this begins, water and nutrients begin to flow more freely through the tree. As that reaches the buds, then the hormone ethylene kicks in and helps to break bud dormancy and rehydrate those buds. Then we'll see new shoots and new blooms appear, signaling finally the return of warm months. And so all that technical jargon to say that these are really, biophysiologically complex processes, but we can witness those. Um, it's just a really cool moment that we can witness like periods of our natural world going to sleep and awakening. So as the days lengthen, the tree's main processes resume, and we can enjoy those beautiful blooms of spring. Um, so what happens during dormancy? Well, plants use winter bud dormancy as a strategy to protect against premature bud break and thereby potential frost damage. As mentioned, in fall, that decreasing day length and increased cold temps will induce or initiate bud dormancy. Then buds are released from dormancy after a specific number of accumulated hours exposed to chilling temperatures. Those temperatures are generally between 32 and 45 degrees Fahrenheit. These chilling hours don't accumulate, above or below that. So below 32, those hours, the chilling hours won't really count towards that accumulation if the temps were too cold. And the chilling hours minimum requirement is going to vary among species. This is a really big deal for fruit growers. Okay, chilling hours requirements must be met for abundant or even adequate flower production, which then, our flowers, of course, lead to fruit production. So if temps are too warm too soon, dormancy may end, then only for another cold snap to hit, and those buds become damaged. And for somebody who, is a fruit grower, that can mean a crop failure. And then just in regard to climate change, winter temperatures are predicted to shift upwards, falling kind of into the temperature range that doesn't count toward chilling hours. And the concern here is that plants meeting their chilling hours threshold sooner are more likely to break bud during a late, winter warm up, as we lovingly call the false spring, over the next several decades, potentially leading to tissue damage from those returning frost and cool temperatures. Okay, so these are a few images of lack of chilling hours. Excuse me, on the very left, it's a red maple that you can see the crown is really sparse. A lot of those buds didn't, get the chilling hours requirements, and so lost out on a lot of growth there. In the middle is a hydrangea paniculata, panicle hydrangea, lack of chilling hours, sparse crown there. And then on the right, a little sugar maple cultivar that again had the lack of chilling. So this can really do some damage. So how do we look for that damage? That's the first thing, the first step in spring tree care is assessing any winter damage that may have occurred. So this is going to show up in several ways, and we shall look at a few of them. First, we're going to, start with that visual inspection. We want to look for damage from frost cracking or sun scald. Typically, that's going to, show up on the southwest side of thin barked trees, though some other species will experience that. Sun scald can happen any time of year by sudden overexposure to sunlight, which damages that growing tissue. But sun scald does the most damage when it's combined with frost cracks. So frost cracking occurs when the sun, in the winter, the sun warms the bark and the outer wood, and it causes it to expand. Then in the absence of sunlight, the temperatures cool, and that same tissue will contract. So these sudden temperature fluctuations are going to result in vertical fractures along the trunk called frost cracks. They will usually manifest as these elongated, kind of sunken, or maybe dried or cracked areas of dead bark. And a lot of those symptoms may not be obvious at first. The damaged outer bark might not start peeling away until summer, well into the growing season. Generally, these aren't fatal to an established tree, but it certainly can leave an open wound for, infection to settle in there. Just a side note on that, a lot of people ask, well, should I cover it with something? Um, we don't recommend any like wound painting products are necessary. In certain cases, some wrap or something might be called for, but that's on sometimes a case by case level. Consistent levels of soil moisture and consistent soil temperatures can help alleviate some of that damage from sun scald and frost cracks. And what do you think helps mediate those soil temperature and soil moisture levels? That's right, it's mulch. We'll talk a little bit more about the benefits of mulch here momentarily. So you're looking for broken branches, other physical damage that might have been caused by heavy snow loads or high winds or ice. Ice makes branches brittle and more prone to breakage, so we really want to be careful then. We look for dead wood and try and remove that as soon as possible. In deciduous trees, you can identify dead wood, even when the leaves aren't on. You look for missing bark. That's a pretty telltale sign. And just so you know, any branches that are longer than 4 feet or more than 2 inches in diameter are dangerous. Those can create a hazard. So, and even more so if that branch of that size is fully or even partly detached. So take immediate action. If it's too big a job for you, please call a professional. You want to stay safe. Also, shoot dieback can be from, either maybe a late fall fertilization where the new tender growth didn't have a chance to harden off, or more likely from what, again, we lovingly call that false spring, or sometimes we call it second winter, that are common in Midwest climates where it warms up a bit early and then it goes back to colder temperatures, which allow buds to open early, but then experience that tissue damage. We also have winter burn, and we will look at a few images of these. Winter burn occurs in desiccated or dehydrated needle or leaf tissue on evergreen plants. So water loss happens more quickly in windy or sunny conditions, even in our low temperatures. Without wind protection, more damage may be noticed on the windward side of the plant, often the south or southwest, but not always. All trees transpire or lose water even through the winter. So evergreens transpire at a higher rate than deciduous trees and therefore suffer more in the winter. Winter desiccation occurs when the amount of water lost is greater than the amount of water the plant takes in through the winter. And that winter burn damage is going to appear as brown needles or brown leaves on branch tips. However, just like frost cracking and winter sun scald, the damage might not show up until early spring, and something else that can help that in sun scald and frost cracking and our winter burn is mulch. If you want to look more in depth into some winter burn, and Illinois Extension does have a few articles that we're glad to share at the end of today's presentation. So here are some images on the left, both top and bottom. That's from snow load, right? We get a lot of ice, a lot of snow piling up, and it's heavy enough to break the branches or limbs. In the middle on the top, that is an image of salt damage on a U. And the bottom in the middle, we have some winter injury, excuse me, on branch tips. So it looks like some new growth began, and then that second winter crept in and killed some of that tissue. And then on the right, this was from a winter freeze event where damage occurred, and then the trunk developed a canker that killed the cambial layer. So this bark's been cut away to show the internal damage from that. And just as a general kind of side note again here, canker is a general term for a symptom of an injury that is associated with an open wound that has then become infected by a fungal or bacterial pathogen. So when you hear canker, that's usually a general term. There are specific, types of canker, fungal and bacterial things. Um, I'm not going to go into depth on those, but oftentimes canker is just a general term, and it has to do with an open wound. So here are a couple images of sun scald. This first one here, you can see that's a young tree, possibly a thin-barked species that experienced some sun scald. You can see from the green grass in the background of this image that it is not winter any longer. So this is an example of symptoms showing up later in the growing season. Then we see symptoms of sun scald showing up in the foliage as chlorosis or yellowing, and perhaps maybe some stunting or a misshapen appearance to these leaves as well. And then here's an image of a slightly more mature tree with pretty extensive damage to the bark from sun scald. And these can be huge wounds that take a while to seal over with that callus tissue. Looks like this tree's got some other problems going on there too, but the initial injury was from sun scald. So how about below ground? Well, you don't have to be able to see under the soil to see evidence of root damage because it often shows up above ground. And symptoms of winter root damage will often show up in the foliage and the branches, just like any other root issues. Because roots don't go dormant in the winter, excuse me, roots don't go dormant in the winter as quickly as stems and branches and buds do. And roots are less hardy than stems because they're somewhat insulated by by the soil, right? We could see evidence of cold damaged roots that then result in foliage that is wilted, discolored, delayed, or stunted, smaller than usual. So again, cold damage is a threat to root health. What can help insulate the soil and minimize soil temp fluctuations? That's right, it's mulch. We also have frost heaving, or sometimes called soil heaving, that can occur when the soil freezes and thaws repeatedly, pushing the trees kind of out of the ground and exposing their roots. This freezing, heaving, and cracking of winter soils physically damages the roots by being pushed and pulled around, particularly those roots near the surface. And as many of us know, a majority of a tree's absorbing roots are in the top 6 to 18 inches of soil. So what can we use to help with this moisture fluctuation? That's right, it's mulch. So again, here's some images. On the left is chlorosis or yellowing on a hackberry leaf. Chlorosis can really be a symptom of just about any stressor or damage, whether it's biotic or abiotic. So it's really hard to nail down a specific affliction just by, well, it's got chlorotic leaves. So just be aware of that. Chlorosis and dieback are like, you know, symptoms of just about everything. So it really takes a little bit more digging deeper. But what it is going to tell you is that the tree is stressed in some form or fashion. And on the right is an image of kind of a combination of root lifting, soil heaving, and wind throw that push the tree and kind of work together to cause this tree's failure. So healthy, hydrated trees are less susceptible to those pest infestations in spring. Proper winter watering ensures they are, robust enough to resist those early season threats. Again, soil moisture is especially important for those young and newly planted trees, as well as any trees planted in the fall. that may not have had an opportunity to establish strong roots before winter. As I mentioned, trees do continue to transpire through the winter, so there's a constant transpirational pull of moisture up through the roots and out through the tree tissue. And again, deciduous trees transpire only minimally through the winter, but our evergreen trees and shrubs continually lose that water through their leaves. So if the soil is too dry, the plants may become desiccated, turn brown, possibly die. You can check soil moisture conditions throughout the year, probably not when the soil is completely frozen, but you can dig a small hole under the tree's drip line, maybe about 6 inches deep. You can, dig in with a trowel or a hand shovel, or even a screwdriver, and check your soil at a depth of about 6 inches. So soil that is moist or damp to the touch is great. If it feels dry, we want to maybe provide some more water. Direct water to the roots. We're not going to like hose the leaves or anything. And to test the soil, you can also try to use a wooden stick, leave it in there for a bit, and if it pulls out wet, you've got some soil moisture going on. And something that helps with retaining soil moisture is mulch. You can also track soil moisture levels on the Illinois State Climatologist website. This is handy for pretty much any weather or climate related data. So now let's look at how we can prevent some of these types of damage. You may have picked up on at least one method already from the presentation so far. So this is young leaves in spring, some new growth. Sometimes a reddish color could be mistaken for cold damage or other things. But for this particular species, this is typical growth. This is an image of the new growth on a young black oak, Quercus velutina, velutina meaning velvety. And it does look pretty fuzzy. So again, we want to provide the amount of water suitable to that species. We're not going to drown our cherry trees that don't like wet feet. We're not going to allow our American hornbeams to totally dry out. Hopefully we put those things in the right site to begin with. But in fall, note to selves, in fall we try to ensure we're providing adequate water to trees and shrubs before the ground even freezes. Okay, so watering slowly and deeply can be done in fall. Or winter until average temps fall below 40 degrees Fahrenheit. And then you can, resume watering in spring when those temps remain constantly above 40 degrees Fahrenheit. It's okay to water in winter because the roots, continue to function, but it may not always be practical, dragging out the hose and so on. So again, watering thoroughly once soil temps are consistently above 40, which in central Illinois is generally around mid-March. Once again, to help with soil moisture, who is our hero? That's right, it is mulch. And again, moisture levels can be found on the State Climatologist website. And knowing, even precip measurements that have come in throughout the year, averages, might help you to know if trees are receiving adequate rainfall in your area of the state. You might have some spring pruning to do, okay? And there are several good reasons to prune in spring for our ornamental trees and shrubs. However, hopefully, that right plant in the right place is going to minimize the need for most pruning, because pruning is not a substitution for correct placement. We don't want to plant something near our sidewalk that's going to overtake it. So give them plenty of space. And when we plant things, we try to keep in mind the mature size of that plant, how big it's going to be when it's mature. When we're pruning, remember that removing more than 30% of the plant impacts that tree's ability to efficiently photosynthesize. I don't recommend shearing when they're bare branches. It's recommended that we wait until there's new growth present to shear off. especially if you're doing shearing to shape them up like a couple times a year. You want to only be shearing that new growth, not into the wood. It's good to have again, a purpose for your pruning. So that can be to improve the shape or the balance of a tree, to reduce its size, maybe initially, but hopefully not every year over time. Um, what we're talking about today, removing winter damaged or dead wood. Pruning can be done to remove undesirable growth like those water sprouts or crossing branches. And pruning can be done to encourage new growth, um, which again, right next to flower and fruit production, those things are really important for growers. Um, in terms of flower and fruit production, those are different pruning methods for fruit trees. The tips that you know we usually talk about are for ornamental woody plants. Um, Timing is very important for pruning our ornamental plants. Generally speaking, if it blooms before July 1, you want to wait to prune after flowering. And if it blooms after July 1, you can prune in winter or early spring before bud break. Evergreens are a different story on timing, and it's going to depend on the species, but I'm glad to provide more information after our presentation today. Pruning at the wrong time won't typically cause long-term damage. You're going to lose part of that year's kind of floral display. And if you're pruning in the correct spot on that branch bark ridge, hopefully your wound is able to seal properly. So what is going to help with pruning? Not mulch, it's pruners. I gotcha. Maybe gloves if you're into that sort of thing, but some of us do prefer to barehand it. We just like blisters. We won't discuss fertilizer in detail because, simply put, it is not always needed. So sometimes nutrients are already present in the soil, but maybe due to soil pH, those nutrients aren't available, which soil pH is a much larger issue than we can address in this presentation, or that we need to be dealing with um, in our yards. I highly encourage soil tests. And if that soil test reveals a nutrient deficiency and the roots are established, then you can address a nutrient deficiency in the spring, or very late fall after leaf drop. We don't fertilize in the late summer or early fall before leaf drop because that's going to result again in that shoot growth that won't have time to harden off before winter. If you do have a nutrient deficiency to address, you might consider the types of fertilizer. There are different application methods for trees, but you do want to refrain from fertilizing newly planted trees until the roots are established, because especially nitrogen fertilization would cause for more shoot growth on a root system that a new tree can't adequately support. So we have to have established roots to be able to support that new growth in the canopy. And keep in mind, if we are fertilizing our lawns, that fertilizer is also being uptaken by tree roots. So be aware of the rates you're putting down and the potential for over-fertilization. Too much fertilizer can negatively impact the health of the tree. And excess fertilizer, if we're getting like runoff, that can wind up in our waterways, and it causes problem with, water quality and aquatic life. So we want to stay away from that. Another thing we like to do in the spring is scouting for pests or disease. And oftentimes scouting is like our first step in preventing, anything bad from happening, preventing some of those pests and disease from moving in. Look for these things now and throughout leaf expansion. Treatment for some things may come later in the year, like many fungal pathogens can infect and spread during spring conditions, and their symptoms may not show up until later. So I have a list of things that we might be looking for if they are relevant in your area. A lot of these probably are across Illinois. If you know of a disease or pest already present in your landscape, excuse me, spring might be the perfect time to take action for that. For example, bagworms. If you saw them last year, We usually get calls about them in maybe July, August, around then, sometimes earlier. And what do I do with these bagworms? Well, at that point in the year, you can pretty much only hand pick them off. Spring is the time to treat the larva when the conditions are right. And a little general practice there is when the Queen Anne's lace is blooming in your area. Needle casts might include stigmina and rhizosphaera. And you can also look for holes from our emerald ash borer friend here. It is still spreading into some central and southern areas in Illinois, so it is still relevant. I know up north you're like, oh yeah, old news, but it is still very much a relevant topic. So what can we use to retain soil moisture to avoid that desiccation? It reduce soil moisture fluctuations, temp fluctuations. We can suppress weeds and weed seeds, lessen competition for the roots. Things like turf grass are huge competitors to tree roots for the same moisture and nutrients that are in that soil. What can add organic matter, improve soil tilth, reduce erosion and sediment, protect from mowers and line trimmers getting too close, and even reduce root injury and stem girdling roots. You guessed it, it's mulch. It is really important to apply mulch correctly. We want to think donut, not muffin, okay? Mulch volcanoes are a big no-no. That is going to, negatively, significantly impact the health of your tree. So we're thinking donut. You want a hole in the middle, keeping it a few inches away from the trunk of the tree. A nice 4-inch layer of mulch. I know that seems excessive, but I promise it will help not only suppress those weeds and retain soil moisture, but it's going to prevent a lot of frost heaving by maintaining more constant soil temperatures. There are a lot of different types of mulch, and for more info on that, we have a Illinois Extension website has some great information on it. So finally, our take-home point here is that it is far easier to provide preventative care than to try and fix problems later. Keeping our trees healthy through practices like placing the right tree in the right site, planting it properly at the right level, because we see a lot of trees that are planted too deeply, and even a few inches too deep can be a huge impact on that tree's health. We want to care for those newly planted trees through the first few years, using proper maintenance best practices like don't leave stubs when you're pruning, don't use those mulch volcanoes, and so on. If winter has caused more damage than you can take on, again, hire a professional. Be really careful. DIY is not always great for some things. So inspecting your trees and scouting for evidence of pests and diseases will be a big help in preventative measures, and continuing education like this webinar and others, ensuring that we're getting information from reliable and scientifically accurate sources. And with that, I will remind you that you can find past recordings of Four Seasons webinar series on YouTube at this short link, go.illinois.edu/4seasonsrecordings. And if you would be so kind, we'd love for you to provide feedback and tell us what you learned, so we can continue to improve these programs as time goes on. I'll leave this QR code up for a moment that you can scan, or you can use the short link go.illinois.edu/root-awakening.